Hi, everyone. So, welcome to today's little lesson on how to decide if you can or should or even want to do a trade show. And this is coming from the financial perspective. So, this is going to have less to do with things like marketing, branding, positioning, and more to do with whether or not the numbers are actually going to line up for you. And if they don't, what you can do about it. I know one of the questions that I'll probably get on this video is, can you use this same format to decide about a craft show? Maybe you've been doing $50 to $100 tabling fees and you really want to take that next leap to that $600 to $1,000 craft show booth fee, or even those $2,500 craft show booth fees that you can get at the higher end. And yes, you can absolutely adapt this just for that. Primarily, of course, this is for trade shows because those tend to be much more expensive. They tend to start off with booth fees that start around $4,000 to $5,000 plus all of the extras on top of that. So this is here, this little spreadsheet is here to kind of help you decide what's worth it, what isn't. Like, let's say you're trying to decide between two different shows and you're trying to decide like if the high traffic from one is going to be worth the high fees, or if the low traffic at the other one is going to be worth the lower fees. How to decide when the extras are worth it or not. So this is here to take actually a little bit of the decision making out of your head and put it down onto paper, or in this case into the cell of a spreadsheet. So let's go to this. So call it the trade show decider. What to do when you don't know what to do. So you're going to start by entering all of your expenses into column B. Now we've got this one set up here. I've already started doing a few things in it. And it's actually okay if you're pretty detailed about this, because the way that a lot of these shows work is you can think at them in the moment like, oh, what's $100 table if I'm going to be making 5, 10, $15,000 back. But that kind of decision making you'll do repeatedly, and those all of those little items, all of those little expenses start to add up, and suddenly you're like an extra $1,000 over budget. So part of this is here to help you see, what you're actually spending. So if you're a little extra detailed, that is actually okay. Feel free to be as type A as you want with this. The other thing to note is that this is going to do a lot of the totaling for you. So anytime you see a shaded cell, something that's not on the white background, just note that that is going to have a formula in it. And in fact, you can see if I click in this cell here, you're going to see up here, here is what the expenses are. All right, so we're going to start off. Let's pretend that you want to do one of the bigger trade shows in New York. That booth fee is going to be at least 4,900. If it's a New York show and you're like me and you live on the West Coast and you're trying to factor in the travel to the location, that's going to be probably, let's just say last time I went to New York from San Francisco is about 450 for a plane ticket, but depending on the time of the year, that could vary. I'm going to put in $500 just to be safe. That's travel to and from the location. Travel at the location. You need to get a taxi from JFK. You need to get your pass for the MTA. You need to get the train from Newark. All of these things also add up. And depending on what kind of work you make, you also might need to not deliver your inventory directly to the space yet, but to your hotel room or to your Airbnb, right? So you might have your inventory with you and you're not going to be able to just get that on a subway. You're going to need to get a taxi or an Uber. So travel at location. Could be as much as 100, possibly. Let's just go ahead and pad this. Again, be detailed, be padded, make your budget. Could be 150. Baggage fees. So if you are flying to and from a trade show, what a lot of makers and designers will do is they will put things into a larger suitcase and pay that extra baggage fee. Now, depending on what kind of systems you have, depending on what kind of credit card you have, you might already have a baggage fee included. But if you don't, this is a good place to put it. So let's assume $100 total, 50 on either end. Accommodations. So right now we're pretending that we're going to do a big show in New York, probably at the Javits. And you're going to need a hotel or an Airbnb, possibly nearby. Those are going to run you at least 2 to 250 a night unless you split it. So this is another place where you can make a decision about how you would like this to go. So if you would like just your own hotel room, you need to like focus at the end of the day, but you're going to be there at least 6 nights, if not seven. Let's say 7 times 200, that would be 1400, but we're going to assume extra fees. So we'll say 1700. And that is about what I paid the last time that I did a show in New York. It was about 1700 for a week. Meals right now that says 50. That's not going to be true. So you do get meals and entertainment budget. It is a tax write off. So you should account for the meals and entertainment that you might have on hand for this show. Probably in a place like New York, you're actually counting more on like $40 to $50 a day, depending on how leanly you would like to have your budget be. Some people, if they stay at an Airbnb, they'll cook their own meals, they'll save some money that way. Other people just account for having a meal's expense, in which case you might be looking at 50 or 60 a day. 50 a day times seven, that's 350. 60 a day times seven, that's 420. So let's go ahead and do that. Entertainment may or may not be relevant to you. If you are entertaining a buyer, sometimes buyers do expect that you might be picking up the tab for something that the two of you do together. That's really up for you to determine on your own if that's something you're comfortable with. Printing. So many of you will need to have printed versions of your line sheets. For the most part, buyers still really like the paper copy, right? So to do the paper copy, you'll be spending at least 50, possibly 100. One of the nice things about being in New York is that you might have a copy shop nearby where you can send your copy job off to pick up later, but it might cost you. So we might be looking at 100. It could even be 150. Marketing. I'm going to come back to that in just a moment. Shipping and freight. So this is a fun one. And it very much depends on what your setup is like. So, if your setup is huge, you've got shelving, you've got tables, you've got display, you've got cases, you've got all of this stuff, you might have to crate and ship from your studio space to the convention center. And that is usually roughly 3 to 400 each way. Very much depends on the size of your pallet, the weight, the everything that goes into it. If you really want to be conservative, you can go ahead and put 750 in here as a ballpark estimate. Though, if this is you and this is something that you're considering, it is worth actually going ahead and doing the research now, building that relationship now with the shipping and freighting company to determine whether or not this is right for you. Something else to consider is that for a lot of designers who are on the opposite coast from the big shows, is they might find a cheap storage space closer to the show so that they aren't paying this much money, this 750 here, every show. Really, is what they would be doing. Some people have done run the numbers and determined that it's cheaper to keep something in storage on the East Coast. Electrical. Depending on which venue you are in, and this is going to be on you to look up all of the show fees, all of the extras, all of the guidelines. Some shows charge more for electrical, and that is usually around $200. But again, you'll have to read through the guidebooks as you get them. Sometimes you can even talk to a sales rep at these shows. Like, let's say that you're not totally sure that you want to do a show at the Javits or at a major like Vegas convention center, and you just want to do your homework. Sometimes they'll send you the prospectus or the packages for them. So you might be able to do that and get that information in advance. Some shows will charge extra for lights. Sometimes you can bring your own. Uh, every venue, it really just depends. Some venues will charge you an arm and a leg for extra lights, like this could be $500. Some venues will charge you if they have to install your own lights. Some venues don't want you to install your own lights. So this will be on you to figure out. Drayage. So drayage is the charge that some convention centers do when, let's say you have, we'll go back up to the shipping and freight line here. Let's say that you've created all of your stuff, you've shipped it on a pallet, and you've sent it to the convention center. Some convention centers will also charge an extra fee to get your crate or your pallet from their loading dock to your booth. And that's going to be a different charge from any company. It'll be a different charge depending on which venue it's in, which city it's in. So, again, this is a point that you might need to research. There are shows these days, though, that don't charge anything for drayage. It's just kind of included in the booth price. So, part of the reason why you might want to do all of this work is to make a decision as to which show might be worth it or which show might be easier to do, right? Like if a show is going to charge you separately just to get your crate from the loading dock to your booth, and you have to wait on them to do that, maybe it's better to do the show that doesn't force you to do that. Maybe it's better to do the show where you can roll up with your own truck, with your own pallet, and load it in yourself. Again, this will be a point of reference. This will be a point of research for you to do. But let's just assume for a moment that drayage is going to be 100. It probably is more than that. Storage. Again, storage, this could refer to the storage that you might do instead of shipping and freighting your work. Storage can sometimes refer to storage at the show. So, depending on the kind of work that you make, there are some extra charges if you would like to store your product in your inventory overnight. This is fairly common. There's usually like armed guard lockup situations, and sometimes this is an extra fee. And for other shows, it is included again as part of the booth price. So, put this in there to figure out if this is worth it to you. Any rentals. Rentals meaning, are you renting a table? Are you renting a chair? Are you renting a display cabinet? Are you renting signage? Are you renting anything? Are you renting walls? Are you renting flooring? Are you renting like really anything that you might be renting? Some designers choose to do rentals instead of paying to crate and ship because they don't want to take the responsibility for what happens if something breaks along the way. Think about it this way, like you're crating and you're shipping, you're putting everything onto a pallet, and you're counting on it getting there in one piece to the show. What happens if it does not get there in one piece to the show in time for the show? Then what are you going to do? So some designers, to kind of take that stress like off of their shoulders, will do rentals. And a lot of the shows have booths, tables, chairs, all manner of display items available to rent. So it's another thing for you to consider. One thing that I would recommend using this spreadsheet and calculator for is try it with shipping and freighting. Try it with like your own purchased items versus what it would cost to do a rental. You could compare the prices between the two and use this to make a decision. Maybe doing the rentals every time is like just a few $100 and it's worth it for your peace of mind. Or maybe it's worth it for you to freight and ship or even store on the opposite coast because you want your booth to look exactly how you want it to look. All of these are questions that you might have, and this is going to help you make that numerical and financial decision. So again, insurance lockup, storage, insurance lockup, you could do those the same or different. Employee expenses. I only have 250 here. This is actually going to be more than that. So employee expenses means, do you have to fly somebody else out with you and pay for their ticket, pay for them to stay in a hotel or Airbnb, and then pay them for their actual time and labor to be your sales associate. This should go in here. This is actually going to be more like 2,500. And of course, if you're somebody who hires, say, a sales staff who's on commission, the commission might be involved in this somewhere as well. I have a nice little column here called incidentals. Why? Because you just never know. I've absolutely been at a trade show where like a box of display stuff didn't arrive in time and had to run out to probably like a Bed Bath and Beyond or a Muji or one of those big stores to get some extra display items. One time, I think it was just like a spray bottle for cleaner, right? Like I forgot to pack cleaner and paper towels because you want to keep the glass cases looking really nice. Whatever that might be, I highly recommend just plopping $200 into your budget for incidentals. Now, we've built this out kind of based on a fantasy scenario, right? So we can keep moving with this fantasy scenario, but I'm actually going to remove a few things that are more likely to be the scenario for you, especially if you're an individual maker or a solo business owner. I'm actually going to take out employee expense. For some shows these days, not all of them, but some shows these days, The trade shows, especially that are more geared towards, say, like maker, individual manufacturer, they want you to be on hand. So you might not be able to pay someone, or maybe you can. It's things have changed in that front. So you might be doing the show on your own, or if it's your first time, you might choose to do the show on your own so you can understand it better and get used to selling at these shows. Maybe you've decided not to do the shipping and freight, or you've decided to do it one way, let's say, and then for the rest of the year, you're also going to do storage. That'll cut down on this a little bit. You might also be looking at all of this and thinking, wow, $1,700 is a big expense for me for only a week in New York. And I'm going to reach out to fellow designers and see if anybody wants to split an Airbnb. And I'm going to cut that down to $850. You're not going to be able to budge on the booth. Travel to location, if points are available to you, I would definitely look into that. Travel at location, depending on what kind of setup you have, maybe you can get away with all subway and some taxis and not, one Uber all the way to and from the airport. Maybe you won't have baggage fees. Maybe you'll cut this meal budget down a little bit and save up for like one special meal out. So maybe this will be more like 350. So this is here to help you make these decisions and to kind of look at it, because right now, assuming that we've shaved some of this off, we're still at a total expense of about 8,700, and this is a very normal budget to do a trade show in New York. In fact, most of the time when I'm counseling clients, I tell them that your basic budget should aim for around 10,000. And that's just so that you're totally, totally covered. But of course, I put most of my clients through this process to see which expenses are absolutely necessary and absolutely vital, and also to see if there's any way to do things differently. And in some cases there are, and in some cases there aren't. But 8,700 is actually a little bit on the low side for a New York trade show. So now we want to move away from the expenses for just a moment and talk about your top line numbers. So this is another way that you can start to make decisions about trade shows. So many of us, myself included, have had some really low selling shows or even the occasional zero sales trade show. It happens. It absolutely happens. It's terrible. Nobody likes it, but it happens. But part of the reason why you do a budget like this is to understand what you're spending and why you're spending it, right? So that you can understand in the future, would you go and back and do this trade show again? How worth it was it? Like, what kind of money do you think you can make from it in the future? Or is it doing something else for your business in the way of, like, I said I wasn't going to mention too much about marketing, positioning, and branding. And this is probably the one time I'll bring it up, because one of the reasons why you would go to do a trade show like this isn't just for the sales, but for the connections, for people to see you, for people to contextualize your work, right? So there might be some other reasons why you do it, but this is going to help you understand how much money you're actually spending and how much money you're actually making, so that you can do a cost benefit analysis later to understand whether or not it was worth it. So let's say that you are a slightly more experienced designer, you've had some press coverage, and you've done some trade shows before. Your expected gross sales, like your total revenue from the show, might be higher than 5,000. I would actually assume that it's going to be closer to 25,000. And this is automatically calculating your cost of goods sold. You can change this formula though. And I wanted to let you know, you can absolutely change this formula. This formula right now is assuming that your cost of goods sold, that is like the materials that it costs you to make your work, whether that's paper and ink, or metals and gemstones, or like the ceramics themselves, or any of the parts you use, the fabric, the all of it, the glass. Those are your cost of goods sold. And if you don't know about that, I do have a pricing course available. I'll drop a link below. But your cost of goods sold should be factored into this, because you didn't just make $25,000. Now you have to go home and make the order. And in order to make the order, you now have to order materials. So backing out the cost of goods sold from the sales that you make at a wholesale show is actually a pretty vital way of figuring out what your actual profit is from a show like this. So I have just an average of 30% factored in here. If you're in jewelry, that's going to be pretty close to true for selling at wholesale. If you sell across other categories, it's great to know your indicators for what you should be targeted for your cost of goods sold. But you can always change this. If you want to make it 20%, you just make that 0.2. The sheet is going to give you a little heads up, and you can say, yes, that's okay, right? Uh, but I'm going to change it back to 0.3 or 30% for right now. Yes, I'm okay with that. So what this is doing is it's taking my expected gross sales at the show. My target goal right now is 25,000. It's going to subtract my cost of goods sold. And this is the formula is minus 0.3, which is 30% multiplied by the expected gross sales. That's where that comes from. Oops. Okay. And then it's also going to subtract all of these show expenses. So all of the show expenses that we just added up, it's going to automatically subtract. And this is giving me my subtotal. So I make $25,000 at the show. We've subtracted the cost of goods out of that. We've subtracted the show expenses out of that, and we're left with what our profit margin is, which is a little over eight, well, a little under $9,000, right? So this is one of those deciding moments, right? Like, is the $25,000 worth it if you have to spend all of this money? Many designers will likely tell you that yes, it is. And that has to do a little bit with both relationships, ongoing relationships with wholesale accounts, and also follow up orders, which is part of the ongoing relationship. So let's say that because you sold $25,000, you're going to ship some of those orders ASAP, meaning that in 2 to 3 months, you might be ready, or they might be ready to place a reorder. So let's say that that reorder is going to be just 2,500. We'll keep it modest, minus $750 in cost of goods sold. And now we have a subtotal of 1,750. If we add those together, 8,800 plus 1,750, we actually now have a total profit from that show of 10,550. And now we're approaching something that is a lot more worth it for this show. So, as you're going through this, as you're thinking about it, just understand that a break even might actually look a little bit different. I want to show you what a break even might look like, right? Because a break even isn't just that you meet these show expenses, right? Because if I put in 8,700 here, remember, you have to back out the cost of goods from the show because you have to go home and make it and order materials, or you have to order the manufactured parts from your suppliers, right? So you're actually kind of running in the red at this point, right? You're at subtotal minus 2,610. So your goal at the show is actually not break even on your expenses. It's break even on your expenses minus your cost of goods sold. So the break even on expenses is probably going to look more like, let's see, 11,000? Close, getting closer. Is it 15,000? Now we're talking. So if you are spending 8,700 total as your expenses for a trade show, you need to be making or you need to be booking, I should say, at least $15,000 in orders, because that is the only way you get to a profit margin. Like, you could probably do it at 14,000, but that's, it's getting tighter. Probably do it at 12,500. 12,500 is just barely profitable. And that's given some information that we have about your cost of goods sold average and your total show expenses. A lot of this information, again, this is why I call this the decider, right? You have decisions to make now. Maybe your decision is going to be that you're going to try to find a show that has a half size booth for 3,500. Maybe you're going to fly on points. Maybe you are not going to do any storage. Maybe you're going to do all rentals, and the rentals for the show are going to be $500, and then you won't have storage. You won't have shipping or freight. And maybe that same show, some of these shows don't have extra for electrical. Some of them don't have extra for lights. So let's take away lights for a moment, and let's take away drayage, right? So now you maybe have a booth fee. Actually, let's make that 3,900, right? So now you have a booth fee that's a certain amount, travel at location, but you flew on points. You're splitting a hotel room still. You're still keeping the meals kind of lean. You're going to do rentals instead of shipping back and forth. And now we're looking at, let's say that we're going to assume for the moment that all things being equal, you're going to make about the same as you would have at the more expensive show, right? Even though you do have to rent more, even though you might still have an electrical fee, even if you're splitting a hotel room, like let's just assume for a moment that you'll make the same amount. And now you can see that the profit margin is actually a little bit better. So as you're going through and you're trying to decide, like, hey, what is it that I want to do? Like, is this working for me? You can go back to this repeatedly and measure whether or not a show was worth it for you. I actually did this years ago with a show that I initially thought had been really good. And when I added up really like all of the sales, all of the expenses, plus the like maybe three follow up orders, it was actually still barely a break even. And so I decided that that show was maybe going to be put on the back burner for me for a while, because the traffic had been kind of slow and I didn't really see a lot of growth in it. But this is also something that I've used to decide between two shows. To decide whether or not it was worth paying for the half booth at a show, even if the full booth would have made my brand look bigger, like maybe the half booth actually would have netted me the same amount of money, and maybe that would have been just as fine by me. So that's the way that I've done this. It's never about it being the end of the story, because it's not. It's about the choices that you have to make in your business, and it's about using financial decisions to drive your business forward. So please feel free to use this, make use of this. You'll be forced to make a copy of it if you download this copy for your Google Sheets or for your Excel. And just let me know what questions you have in the comments, and remember to like and subscribe.